Andrew, what's up, man?
Scott, hello, my friend.
It's great to be having this conversation, and I cannot reiterate how foundational and game changing the retreat that you put on about a month ago called Junto was for me. And I think where I wanted to anchor this conversation is in the concept of relational leadership. And I loved the story that you told at that weekend. So maybe to frame things up, when did relational leadership come alive for you, and what does it mean?
Yeah, so fundamentally, I believe that relational leadership is the state of mind where we take responsibility for the quality and state of every relationship that matters to us. So, whether that's in our personal or professional life, it means that we are responsible for the state that that relationship currently exists in. And one of the frames that I kind of pull heavily from and that I love is one that comes from conscious leadership. It's this idea of being above the line or below the line, and we have this kind of subconscious reference to what that feels like in a relationship. It's above the line. It's like we're freely expressing ourselves, we're honest, we feel like we're being understood, like we can collaborate. Below the line, we feel like we're being judged, we can't be honest, we're withholding the truth. Oftentimes feels up those the tension, the anxiety, the resistance. And so fundamentally, relational leadership is this process of taking responsibility for all those relationships that are below the line and opting into this mindset of the leader, where these relationships are not happening to us. We are the creator of them. And relational leadership presents this practical kind of 4-step framework that helps us to look at any relationship in our life consciously and intentionally move that forward into the way where it's serving us and the people that we care about most effectively.
That's amazing. And I remember you telling the story of how you were you were doing a lot of speaking, you were working on this stuff, and then you had a conversation with a woman at, I believe it was I don't know, maybe some type of like hotel leadership training or something that kind of shifted your perspective on all this.
Yeah, there was a singular moment that shifted my entire approach to communication and relationship training. And so I've been doing this for quite some time. And a lot of my own, if I synthesize like what is it that I do, I like to say that I build technology, both digital and analog, that helps people to communicate effectively and connect deeply. And so much of my motivation to create in this space, in this arena, is driven by my own challenges growing up as a really lonely, insecure young kid in Hawaii who didn't have a lot of friends and was so inhibited and had so much social anxiety. And even in my early 20s, when I was building my first nonprofits, had so much trouble communicating myself in front of an audience or hanging out in crowds of people who I perceived to be more accomplished or successful than I was. So my desire to build so many of these tools that help other people to communicate and connect is just because I really wanted those for myself. And even at an early age, I got really adept at how to communicate effectively, right? I had the tools of how to ask the right questions at a networking event. I knew how to package a story effectively from a stage or to give a TEDx talk to help people to get a tangible takeaway. I learned how to like adequately parse out a pitch deck to raise capital. But the reality of my internal experience is that I was still filled with all that insecurity, all that self doubt, the internal dialogue that was constantly just repeating itself and oftentimes so deprecating. And there was a moment where I got invited to attend this conference for something called Gestalt Communication for Leaders. And so Gestalt psychology is this experiential form of therapy that was kind of a response to psychoanalysis that was the most popular form of therapy in the 60s and 70s. And so the founder of Gestalt therapy, he had a lot of qualms with psychoanalysts and basically said that a lot of psychoanalysis was based on this precedent that people were kind of inherently controlled by their subconscious thoughts and desires and feelings, and that we needed to basically understand those and put controls around people so they wouldn't express those in the world. And Fritz Perls, the founder of Gestalt, would say that actually, like, humans are fundamentally good, but we're very rarely given the opportunity to experience and express the totality of our emotional experience. And so Gestalt was this framework that helped people to connect deeply with their emotional experience and express it completely. And he felt that in that experience of expressing the emotions fully, that there was a lot of insight and wisdom that we could make use of to drive our lives forward consciously. And so I got invited to this week-long training in this modality. And I always remember that the facilitator of that event, he started it off and he says, I'm going to invite you to embrace uh, just 3 pillars of awareness while we're here. So first, I'm going to invite you to engage your thoughts and your feelings as real and valid and deserving of a voice. So whatever you're thinking and feeling, we're just going to say that freely. Great. Second, we're going to try and understand each other and ourselves at the deepest level possible. So if you have a question, I'm going to invite you to ask that question. And last but not least, I'm going to invite you to just be fully here in the room with ourselves and each other, to try not to bring any stories from the past, to make any predictions about the future or what's going to happen. But if you can just give yourself to those 3 pieces of awareness, I promise you, you will have an important experience here. And whenever I do transformational retreats, I kind of like to throw the bow lines of my identity off and just say, whatever you're presenting, I want to try that on for size and see how that impacts my experience of reality. And so one of the first exercises that we did was this kind of contact movement exercise. So we start walking around the room, and there's about 30 of us. I'm one of the younger people who's there. And I remember that I had this experience where I am walking around. They say stop, and they say now face the person who's closest to you, and now step up to them toe to toe. And so I step toe to toe with this man who's now like right here in front of my face, and they say, I want you to say exactly what you're thinking. And it feels vulnerable even to say this, but this was what was true in that moment. But I said to the man, this feels homoerotic, and I feel like my own fear of closeness keeps me from the men in my life. And it was the most real thing I could have possibly said in that moment. It was exactly what was going on in my mind. I remember that the next thing that happened was the man across from me, he pounded his chest like this because he also felt that way. That's how you show someone in a space like that, that you empathize with what they're sharing. And I remember feeling these tingles over my body of simply sharing the thing that was most real in that moment. And then also seeing that the thing that was most real connected with the person that was across from me. And so after that exercise, they gave us our first break. And so I remember I go over to the coffee machine, and here's the moment that really transformed everything and that you're talking about is there's this woman there, and her name's Megan. And I had been trying to connect with her. She's a successful media entrepreneur. And I was having this experience with her of any time that I would ask her a question about her business, about her life, she'd give me a one question or a one word answer. She was looking around the room while we're talking to each other. And I just remember that I started to get into my head. My own insecurity started to come up while we were talking of like, oh, she's not interested in me. I'm not cool enough. You name it. And so I was now tracking my internal dialogue. But as I'm at the coffee machine, she starts to walk over. And I remember what the facilitator said. Anything you're thinking and feeling is real and valid. Give it a voice. And I was like, okay, let's try it on. So Megan walks over, and I remember turning away from the coffee machine. I look at her and I say, hey, Megan, can I share something with you? And she said, yeah, sure. And I said, so I just wanted to let you know that I've been really trying to make an effort to connect with you because I think what you've built is really cool, and I'd love to go deeper with you. And I also wanted to share that I haven't really felt you reciprocating or taking an interest in me. And I want to let you know that it's all good, but I'm going to stop. And so if you ever want to chat with me, just know I'm available for it, and I'm here. And she just kind of paused for a moment. And then you know what happened next. She starts bawling right in front of me. She starts crying. And now I'm like, man, this authenticity stuff is bullshit. This isn't working at all. And she pipes up in a second and she says, Andrew, this is the last place on the planet that I want to be. She said, my boyfriend and I are breaking up. My co-founder is suing me. She's like, I do not want to be here. And then immediately in that moment, it was like the lines of the Matrix appeared to me because I realized that I was not in a relationship, or I wasn't connecting with Megan. I was connecting with my story of Megan, of who she was, of what she was thinking about me, about how she'd respond to me just sharing what it was that I was feeling and thinking. And immediately I realized that I was doing that everywhere else in my life, that I was withholding my truth. I was packaging who I thought I needed to be, how I needed to express words, how I needed to share what was going on for me, because I had a story about how everyone else that I was connecting with was going to respond for it, what they were available for, what they would like, what they would not like. And then what I saw was Megan went back into that room after the break and she shared what was real for her. She said, I need to share something with the room. She shared, this is what's happening in my life. I have this thing with my boyfriend. I have this with my founder. I don't want to be here. And then the facilitator said, is there anyone else who doesn't want to be here? 3 other people raised their hands and they're like, I don't really get this. I don't understand the value of it. I'm so busy right now. And so immediately it transcended from me just recognizing how I was interacting with a story of people and not with them. But also, I saw that me simply sharing what was most real for me was now creating space for the people around me to share what was real for them. So, what I was able to do was to connect with my own authenticity as this act of service, that truly it was
Mm.
creating space for other people to share their own truth. And I think that that was what was such a shift for me, because I think that fundamentally, it's like when I look at you, Scott, or anyone who's listening here, I want the people who are around me to feel like they can be themselves. And what I realized in that moment is that if I have that desire for the people around me, I can't ethically want that for them if I'm not willing to model it first. And so this was the moment where my work shifted from packaging myself to say the right thing, to understand how can I elegantly, practically, and effectively share the real thing? How can I make it easy and productive for people to tap into what their internal experience is and to bring that into their outer world, into their relationships, so that other people can do the same thing and ultimately bring all of our relationships into a place of truth and being fully expressed.
It's a beautiful story, and I feel like it's kind of a leg of the stool for me as I think about my own experience where quite frankly, a lot of us that have been on the consciousness path, a lot of people listening to the show, they're on this path of self-discovery just to figure out who they really are,
Yeah.
and just as an example of that, like though I thought I was feeling my feelings, for the first 30 years of my life, I actually probably wasn't really feeling a whole lot, right? It was an unconscious game of suppression. And so, what I find so compelling about what you're talking about is there's the step of increasing our emotional literacy, learning to feel into the body, truly allowing ourselves and giving ourselves permission to feel what is felt. And then there's that additional step, which in some of the work that we did together over the Junto retreat is actually being fully expressed in a way that does not come off as abrasive or disintermediate you from people. And that to me is like such a critical component that doesn't perhaps get as much love in a lot of these consciousness talk circles
Yeah,
and
sure.
wisdom teachings. It's kind of like, yeah, just, meditate and let go and surrender and all that. And all of that is great. But there is a time and a place as well to elegantly share what is true for you in these relationships. And so I love the message, and I love talking about this with you, man.
Yeah, well, it makes me think of the book that Scott, as well as 4 other people, gave me. I recently held a book rave for my birthday party where I had about 80 people join me to dance around in my house, and all of them brought their favorite or most influential book. And 4 people, including Scott, brought me The Surrender Experiment. And so I finally bit the bullet and I dove in. And I remember about halfway through The Surrender Experiment, Mickey talks about the moment of him committing to his own self realization and then realizing that it was actually about service, right? And that
Mm.
it was not just about his own self realization, but that his own self realization came on the path to service. And for me, I think I had a similar kind of experience of the Junto, and as really our mission, and as it's evolved and formalized, it really has been that so much of the work that we did was foundationally about this emotional literacy, about creating space for men to have these experiences where they are fundamentally safe to explore their emotional experience, anything that they've been suppressed, anything that they have felt afraid or incapable of just being with and having witnessed, creating that space where they can connect with those emotions, where they can share them, where they can be held in that experience, where they can hold space for other men to have that. And I realized that it was so developmental and helpful for men to have this experience, to be able to know themselves more deeply, who they are, what they need in their lives. And that for me, the way that I was able to bridge that into the realm of service was really through the relational. It's that so much of our emotional experience is dictated really in relationship to the people who are in our lives. And so, how do we provide a practical bridge where, like, what it is that we're feeling, who we are in this present moment, which I think the emotions are the most effective tool to articulate who that is, like that nebulous question of who am I. Like, ultimately in a moment our emotions are going to get us just about closer than any other tool or mechanism of language that I can think of. And so then, like I talked about, like, how do you elegantly connect with the experience and present that in a way that is productive and also generative in cultivating the emotional experience of other people and helping other people to do that work themselves. But that element of service, I think, is so foundational to this. And I think it's helpful for people that are on this transformational path as well. Of, there's that great example we talk about in the Junto of, you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And at the very tip top, we all understand it as self-actualization. So it's physical needs, physiological needs, emotional needs, esteem needs, and then self-actualization. So just manifesting one's full potential. And what a lot of people don't know is that towards the end of Maslow's life, he developed a relationship with Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And it was really through that relationship that Maslow realized that the the idea of self-actualization as the pinnacle of human expression was kind of a false paradox, because if we are simply trying to actualize the self, um, the moment that we actualize the self, a new precipice of a potential would immediately appear. So it was an unattainable goal. And what he realized, talking to Frankl, preeminent scholar on purpose, is that if we wanted to actualize the self, our goal had to be bigger than the self. And he replaced the peak of the triangle of human motivation with self transcendence. That, again, like, to actualize the self, if that is our goal or a goal, we need to have some sort of goal, a calling that is bigger than us. And so I think that, again, it's when we're grounded in how we can connect with and explore our experience, and the emotions are just one lens to do that, but then bring that into the relational and invite other people to come with us. It makes it so much more inspired and motivating to dive into our own practice. So I'm excited to share more, and we can even dive into the practical application of it, or how it
Yeah.
how it works.
One thing that I would just call out is kind of paradoxical in my own um, learning and thinking is that I think a lot of us are conditioned to believe that being the nice guy or kind of keeping not hurting someone is an act of service. That was kind of the default program my entire life, which was really a more of a reflection of self-abandonment. And I think your insight of how we actually create space for others to bring more of themselves, to feel more whole when we're honest, even if it's a hard conversation, is a very, very astute and empowering idea.
Yeah, it's again, it's one of the most liberating for me that I come back to. It's that if I can look at somebody that I'm in a relationship with and say to myself, do I want this person to feel free to be themselves? Like, they're safe to be themselves, to feel their feelings here. I have to be willing to do that first, to show them that it's safe to do it. And I'd say, again, it's, on the other side of that as well, a lot of times we withhold our experience, number one, because no one has ever given us the communication tools to speak without shame, judgment, and criticism. So a lot of times what we're doing is we're not actually owning our experience. What we're doing is articulating why someone else is a certain way, or we're making other people responsible for what it is that we're feeling. So example, like, right, it's we're feeling upset rather than actually owning, I'm upset, I'm angry. We're saying, you're such an asshole. And what we're doing by castigating some sort of blame, shame, guilt on somebody else is we're just avoiding owning what it is that we're feeling, because we haven't been given the tools or really shown like what the value is of that. And then another frame that I think is really helpful when it comes to sharing our emotional experience, and why that is so valuable, is that so often what keeps us from sharing the authentic emotional experience that we're present to is because we have a story, much like I did with Megan, if I wasn't in that workshop, that, oh, I can't tell her that she's not interested in me, or that she hasn't been showing an interest because that might make her upset, that might make her uncomfortable. And that what happens is that we're oftentimes in these stories of how people are going to perceive us, how they're going to respond to us, how it's going to negatively impact a desired outcome, like belonging in a community. But anytime we make up these predictions or make assumptions about how people are going to respond to us, we are fundamentally removing their agency to show us for themselves. Like I invite people to think about that for themselves, that if someone that you work with is having a real challenge working with you, but they don't want to tell you that because they're afraid that it will make you upset, that it will make you uncomfortable, I just ask most people, would you rather that person come to you and share their honest feedback of something that you've done, how it's negatively impacting their work? And most people I know would say that yes, they would prefer that someone actually come and talk to them rather than withholding their judgment, their experience, and allowing it to negatively and subconsciously impact the relationship. And so again, I think that we give people agency to respond for themselves when we're able to share our experience. And I think that so much of relational leadership is really in avoiding the shame, the blame, the guilt, and learning to share purely through our own emotions, our own needs, and our own requests of other people, so that they're more available to meet us and give us what it is that we need.
So let's get into the practicality of
Let's
this,
do it.
because I imagine there's a lot of people that hear this, and there's some people that probably go, okay, this sounds great, but how do I do that? And then there's probably some other people that just start to walk around and just project shit like crazy
Totally.
and just total loose cannon. So I would love to hear the elegant recipe, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the frames that I can find oftentimes motivating and frustrating for the people that I'm working with as a coach is this frame of victim and leader. And oftentimes it's, let's take a moment for people who are listening to this to think of one relationship in your life where you are currently experiencing tension or conflict. So if you just think of one person in your life that you're experiencing tension or conflict with, and I'll articulate that this is someone with whom you desire a healthier, more productive, more generative relationship with. If this is someone in your life with whom you don't like, you don't enjoy, you don't want to have a relationship with, then I don't think that this is a helpful frame. But this is, again, someone who's in your life that you want a healthy, productive relationship with, where you're currently experiencing some sort of conflict, where you're currently experiencing some tension, where you might be withholding something that you've been feeling and not sharing. And so, oftentimes when we find ourselves in the judgment cycle where this person has done this thing, this person is this way, this person will never be able to meet me for what I like, give me what I need from them. So long as we are in this cycle of blaming other people for our relationship not being in the state that we would like it to be, what I would posit is that we're kind of in this victim mindset. Is what we're saying is that we are not capable of bringing this relationship into the state that I would like, that we need it to be in. And so if we are in this cycle of blaming, of shaming, of guilting someone else, we can acknowledge that it's natural to have those thoughts, but that the transition into the leadership mindset simply starts by acknowledging, what is it that I am currently feeling and not sharing, is owning the emotional experience that is present in that relationship. And so if we have a relationship that's present, let's say that there's a business partner, this person has been communicating with you at all hours of the night, you need them to stop, and this is making me stressed. So it's like, rather than talking about who the person is, their negative behaviors, whatever it is, it's, I'm just going to own my experience, my emotion in the relationship. So this thing has happened. I'm feeling stressed. And for those who are not familiar, a lot of this framework comes from nonviolent communication. And so nonviolent communication is, in my estimation, like one of the most effective modalities and frameworks to cultivate clear communication, to navigate conflict, and help people to come back into connection. And so there's a frame within nonviolent communication. You can remember it as OFNR. It's OFNR: observation, feeling, need, request. And so once we've made this decision of, I'm not going to come into this blame cycle, I'm not going to be a victim, I'm going to step into the role of leader, we just point out, what is the behavior that has happened? So this person is reaching out to me at all hours of the night on Slack. This is an observable thing that has happened. And what we can do to distinguish an observable behavior is what's objective versus subjective. So if you think about saying what someone has done, if I were saying my business partner is being psychotic, my business partner is being pushy, these are subjective assertions about what your business partner is being. If you were to ask a studio audience who's watching your life, is the business partner being pushy? You might have some people who say that they are being pushy. You might have some people who are saying that they're not pushy. But if you have a studio audience and you were to say, my business partner is messaging me until 1 and 2 a.m. in the morning consistently 3 or 4 nights a week, that's something that is an observable behavior that you could look at, and the entire studio audience could confirm that that happened. And the reason that making objective observations is so important to facilitate communication off the jump is that when we make a judgment or a hyperbolic assessment of being pushy, it's very hard for someone to acknowledge their behavior, because that may mean something very different to them. It might be exhaustive of the entirety of they're not pushy all the time. They're just pushy in this one case. So what happens is, when we are sharing judgment or hyperbolic assessments of people, it makes it difficult for them to own the specific behavior that is impacting you. So stepping into leadership is taking responsibility for, this is the behavior that's not working, and owning next, which is your feeling. So you've been reaching out to me at all these hours of the night, and it makes me feel stressed, right? So it makes me feel stressed. And then the next step, where we come from just owning our feeling, because you're not making the person wrong. You're not making the person some sort of name or blame. You're just owning that this is my experience, right? So this is what I'm feeling. And then what we do is we come off of the feeling into our need. And this is understanding. I'm friends with a guy named Tom Bond, who runs the Nonviolent Communication Center in New York. And he has this interesting frame of reality. He calls it needs-based consciousness. And it's this idea that everyone is doing what they're doing to fulfill some sort of need. And if we can think about behavior through that lens, it's helpful to be able to understand, like, why people are acting a certain way, why we're acting a certain way. So needs-based consciousness. And oftentimes, if we look at it through that lens, we can look at our feelings are all the product of our needs either being met or unmet. And so a new level of relational mastery comes into play when we're able to understand and articulate the needs that are not being met, that are responsible for our negative emotional states. And a lot of times we're making other people wrong for not giving us what we need, because we're not even clear on what it is that we need. And so this is where, again, I think another level of leadership comes in. It's like, a lot of times we make people wrong for not giving us what we need, because we're not even clear on what it is that we need, or we haven't communicated that. And so the need is clearly articulating what you needed, not moving forward, but in that moment. So let's say this business partner sends another message at 2 a.m. in the morning on Slack. And so what do I need? I need a space from work where we are not communicating. And I need that space to be between 10 o'clock and 9 a.m. in the morning. That's an objective need that he's now articulating, being clear about like what he needs to feel good moving forward, and presenting that to his partner. And then we move forward and we would say request. So here's the need that wasn't met. So moving forward, I would love to have some sort of agreement where the time that we're communicating with ourselves is time boxed in some capacity, and to understand like if that works for you or not. So now what you've done is, rather than making an assessment about your partner being pushy, your partner being obsessive compulsive at work, maniacal, whatever that might be, what you've done is you've just taken responsibility for, again, feeling the feeling, understanding what it is that you need that is the culprit, what's bringing about the feeling, and being very clear for the request of what is needed moving forward. And ultimately, that process of looking at any relationship, being able to communicate, is one of the most effective that I can really look at for communicating a feeling like we have just talked about. And so much of it just stems from, as soon as you feel that tension, and naturally we go into judgment of others, can I look at how I want to be? Like, how I want to be. Do I want to be a victim who is kind of at the result of my relationships, or the creator of them? And when we start to adopt this frame of communicating, we just find that our experience is usually valid and there, and we can just commit to that and coming back to it time and time again. And we find that we really are in control. We're in a place of leadership in any relationship. So that would be a great place to start.
That's a wonderful and thorough explanation. And I think, tactically, what we did at the Junto was we thought about a scenario in our life that matched those conditions. I think a great way to inspire that is, who do you talk shit on? And we crafted a text message, a long text message that more or less followed that format. And I have to tell you, my heart was racing when I sent the text message, but I also felt such an immense freedom that came after that, because there was just such a welling of unexpressed feeling. Even when I did my own inner work,
Yeah.
there was still stuff there. And I think that's important, right? I think it's important to do both, and why this can be so helpful.
Yeah. Well, I think
What?
there's another layer that's there, which is, I think that when we identify whether it's people that we're talking shit on in our lives, right? If there are people who we are talking negatively about behind their backs, like whatever that might be, a lot of times we are holding on to things. So even before you get to nonviolent communication, the authenticity piece of relational leadership, again, stepping into a leadership role, like, I'm not going to just talk, I'm going to take action. I think that that's first, is just the intentionality. But the next is just curiosity. Is, before we even get into our experience, we're oftentimes making up assumptions again about what people are feeling. And so for people who we are talking negatively of, before we even share things, just to try and understand them more deeply. What do I want to understand about that person? So like the person who's reaching out incessantly until early hours in the morning, does that person want to be doing that? Right? Do they want to communicate until 2 a.m. in the morning? Like, how often do they actually need to be doing like this specific behavior? Or oftentimes, like, we're holding assumptions about like, how are you feeling about the business right now? He feels like it's going to fail and we need to do this, but just checking in. And so, a lot of times before we get to that piece of authenticity and nonviolent communication, even starting with intentionality, stepping into the archetype that we'd like to express, a leader versus a victim, the curiosity, what do I want to know about this person? What it is that they're feeling, what it is that they want, and then coming into my own feeling and what we're going to move forward with from there. So that's again, in any situation, I think you come out of the role of the kind of effective, and you're now the affective.
I imagine many people hear this and they're nervous about someone responding poorly.
Yeah.
What would you advise, either in anticipation of those scenarios where someone might be feeling like that, like, this sounds good, but I don't know how this person's going to respond, or when that actually happens?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many frames there of, oftentimes when I think of relational leadership, I think of one of the frames that I encourage people to hold is that our ability to engage the tension, the anxiety, the resistance that often comes in our body when we're talking about challenging relationships is where we're able to derive so much of the energy to take action. So wherever we're feeling that is a marker of where there's an opportunity to take action. And so tension, that's what we feel in our body. Anxiety, what we have in our mind. Resistance, that's the inability to act. And oftentimes, the reason that we are withholding information is, again, it's we're worried about how we're going to be perceived, about the result that's going to happen, the outcome. And a lot of times we withhold because we want to be liked. And a lot of times, I think a lot of people who are probably listening to your show are entrepreneurial, they're in high level roles within companies. And what I encourage people to anchor into rather than being liked is being respected. And what I would invite you to consider is, as a leader, can I respect myself if I am not honest? And am I optimizing for being liked, or am I optimizing for being respected? And oftentimes, as a leader, most people will acknowledge that being respected is more important. But also, what we're doing through this frame is just, again, not just communicating in this way as a mechanism for ourselves to be expressed, but what we're also doing is approaching this way of authentic communication as a vehicle for other people to speak honestly as well. And when we're able to approach this type of communication of like, hey, I'm going to share something that's scary, but also it's creating space for the other person who is there to share something that is also scary for them, that's sometimes helpful. And I think one of the big frames as well is there's a really popular book that's out right now. It's called The Courage to be Disliked.
Mm.
And it's, again, if we think about relationships that we are holding on to, if we have a fear that sharing my feelings, sharing my authentic needs with people is going to lead to the dissolution or the dissolution of a relationship that's important to me, we need to ask ourselves a really important question, which are those the relationships that I truly want to be in? Do I want to be in the relationships with the type of people who are not available or interested in how I'm feeling and in what I need? And again, we have to be willing to risk what it is that we have to create what we want. And so I think that there's so much power in embracing that. And oftentimes, time and time again, what I find is that when we're able to elegantly introduce more truth, that there is more connection there. And even if we do find out that someone is not aligned or available for what we really need, then we just create space for relationships that are aligned, that are able to meet us where we're at. And so those are just a few of the frames of reminding ourselves that it's, again, we're optimizing for being respected, not for being liked. And can we respect ourselves if we're not telling the truth? That we have to be willing to risk the relationship to keep the best relationships, and that really is leadership. And that this way of communicating is not just about us being fully expressed, but it is, again, leadership of creating space for other people to be expressed. And you have to do that for other people to do that. And you had this experience of Junto, but again, it's, oftentimes we are just so in our own experience that we forget how much everybody's holding on to. Everybody has their thing, right? It's like everybody has shame. Everybody has,
Everybody's got shit.
everyone's got shit. And it's just, again, so it's like everyone has their shit. The person who's courageous enough to elegantly and like with discernment share that, it's a relief for the people who are around you. We get to take a breath and say like, oh, like I can actually be my whole self here. And that if you can hold that type of space, are you more likely to engineer connection, trust, safety with those people, or alienate them? And I'd say it's certainly the former.
How would you say someone becomes practiced at this?
I think that there's a lot of it. I mean, relationally, I think that the way that you look at it, the way that you turn relationships into the lab is simply to look at any area in your life where you have a relationship that you experience tension, where there's consistent conflict. So even like right now, like if you were to make a list of Like, who are the people in my life who I'm experiencing tension with or conflict? So those are very specific places where there is likely something that you are feeling and not sharing. And that was a model within the frame of Gestalt that Fritz Perls would often talk about. He would call it unfinished business. And so he would ask participants in his circles, like, what is a relationship where where you're withholding something, where you've been feeling something and not sharing? And what he would do is he would invite people to come into circle and to share that specific thing. I think that so much of relational leadership is just getting to a place where the important things that you are feeling, needs that are not being met, appreciation that we have, that we are just fully expressed, where all of our relationships have been moved. Again, like, we know what a relationship feels like when it's above the line. We see that person, we're smiling, we feel good, we're excited, we're energized, we share all of ourselves. And so in those relationships that are above the line, being fully expressed, I think, is a lot of just like curiosity, sharing appreciation, continuing to cultivate and nourish those ones. But also, when we're withholding, when we're experiencing tension, that is the opportunity where we get to say, am I going to tolerate this relationship in a state that does not work for me? Or am I going to make a decision to be a leader, to ask questions about what this person's feeling, to own what I'm feeling, what it is that I need, to make requests of what would help me to feel better in this relationship, and to create space for them to share the same with me. So it's like, if you start one list there, and it becomes a conscious practice where we just start to realize that anytime a relationship is not in a condition that works for us, we have a practical mechanism to take action. And again, we're just not the victim of relationship, but we know how we want to be and what we can do to move things forward and to be fully expressed.
I love it. And I love the practicality. I know the above the line concept, and highlighting and emphasizing that also is inclusive of being expressed, to me is so important, because I know for a lot of my listeners who are, deeply in kind of wisdom teachings, consciousness, there is this weird phase of, I would call it the evolution of experience, where your identification shifts. And you go from thinking that you are, a bunch of thoughts in your heads and ideas in a body, to an awareness, to perhaps something even more expansive. But there still is a practicality to the day-to-day experience, where we're in these conversations with people and we feel things. And, if those don't get addressed, which I don't hear many yogis talking about, there is just unnecessary suffering that occurs. And so I think this can really jibe nicely with many people that are on that path.
Yeah. And again, it's when we can tie it into an act of service. It's like, it's just that. It's not just feeling our feelings and being able to work through things and figure out what we want, but it really is. It's like, for the people that we care about, who haven't heard this podcast, who haven't been able to go to seminars and this kind of conscious communication, it's that our authentic experience and our mastery of that is actively creating space for other people's truth wherever we bring all of ourselves. And like, I love living my life as that. It's again, it's like, teaching this just means I have to be in the practice of it. And it's like, when I'm feel that, when I'm below the line with a girlfriend or a co-partner, like a co-founder, it's another opportunity to live it. And I just know why that's so important to me, and like how I want to show up on the world.
Where, more of a personal curiosity, where in your life are you pushing your edge right now?
Where in my life am I pushing my edge right now? I am pushing my edge right now by, yeah, I mean, like, one area that comes up is, again, it's like, I have a very loving, incredible ex-wife who is, we just recently got divorced in January. So an area I'm pushing my edge is just choosing to communicate consciously, like when it's challenging. And so an edge of that was like, again, was really understanding my own values around communication, and in a really heightened situation where we love each other, we have a great family, we're still friends. And like, even in moments like that, that were really challenging, an edge for me was being so clear on my frame of communication, of conflict resolution, but being able to maintain a sense of integrity in a moment where, in moments where it's really challenging. And I think that, again, for me, a reason like that comes up as my edge is, for a lot of people who experience social anxiety, codependency, it's like that. What's behind that pattern is that they're externally validating themselves. They need the external world to tell them they are enough, to feel that intrinsic sense of value. And that was certainly a pattern of mine from younger. And I think that now, just to be so clear on the value of this type of communication, no shame, no judgment, sharing from our experience, owning our own needs, just being able to hold integrity in relationship when it's challenging. And even in the new romantic partnership, of navigating issues and like seeing in a new relationship the quickness that conflict can be resolved and diffused when committing to this, is like an edge. So even though this is something that I get to teach and write about, I think that where I'm pushing my edge is just, again, like continuing to practice it more deeply and more honestly is showing up as an edge.
That's beautiful, man. It's beautiful. The wonderful part about evolution and our growth is that it never ends.
Never
And
ends.
if you grow to love it, then you always have something to do.
Where,
And
where are
so,
you where are you pushing your edge?
uh, great question. I would say for me, it is acceptance of what is with my physical health.
Hmm.
I would say there has been an immense amount of frustration and personal comparison of kind of like, oh man, like I'm not what I used to be, and I used to be able to do this, and I used to be able to eat this, and I used to, and just a general sense of uh, comparison and looking at what was instead of loving what is.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that I'm complacent in my desire to get back to the level of vitality that I seek in my life.
Yeah.
But in the process, not putting unnecessary expectations and suffering uh, on myself, I think is something that is just an everyday, constant experience. And I have to give you props to bring it back to Junto. One of the things I'm exploring is Ayurveda because I felt so good with the food that weekend, and I've been learning about that, and it's really fascinating. And I also think intuitively makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm connecting with Chef Rachel
Chef
on
Rachel,
Friday.
Kuma Kitchen, shout out.
Yeah, shout out to Chef Rachel in Austin. So yeah, man, that's kind of the big thing for me right now.
Beautiful, man. Well, I've loved reading more on the Substack and love what you're doing. And I'm happy that we got to do this and chat more deeply about it.
Yeah, this is a beautiful conversation, and I want to give you an opportunity to just kind of share the latest and greatest of what you're working on for everyone out there who wants a little bit more of Andrew, because who doesn't want that? Um, and I can certainly vouch for our experience
Yeah.
together at the Junto.
Yeah. So for the last 8 years, I've been running this company called Tribute, which is kind of the industry leader in creating these group video montages where you basically gather a group of people and surprise one person with a video montage of all their friends and family, telling them why you love them, why they're amazing. And so I have been gracefully stepping away from day-to-day ops to focus more on this work in the realm of transformation. And so, what Scott has talked about are these Junto retreats that we do quarterly all around the US. And so those are all grounded in these four pillars of emotional mastery, of personal integrity, relational leadership, and service. And so, if you're interested in diving deeper into these modalities with a group of really exceptional men in the wilderness, would love to hear from you. And you can check that out at wejunto.com. I work with a small number of entrepreneurs and execs as a leadership coach. And I am currently working on a book right now, which is very fun to have some space down in Costa Rica to write, called Social Flow, coming out next year, which is a 4-question framework to create confidence, conversation, and connection wherever you go. And yeah, if you want to catch up with me, you can also just go to my personal website. It's andrewhorn.com.
Love it. And I will link out all those things. So just head to the show notes if you want to find those resources. But Andrew, this has been a blast as usual. And just keep it up, man. You're doing some great things for the world and being a great service to everyone by just being you. So thank you.
Thanks for having me, brother. The feeling is very mutual.